Welcome everyone to Current in 30, the 30-minute webinar series brought to you by the Current Consulting Group. We are thrilled to have you with us. To briefly introduce this series, each session is designed to keep you informed, efficient, and ahead of the curve. On the second and fourth Mondays of each month throughout 2026, we'll break down 3 key things you need to know about workplace drug screening, from emerging trends and regulatory updates to best practices and practical implementation tips. If you missed our previous session, 3 things to know about new drug testing laws from 2025, you can find it on our website or on our YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us today. Let's dive right into the insights that matter most. I'm Greta Walsh of the Current Consulting Group, and today's presentation is titled Current in 30, 3 Key Things to Know About Workplace Drug Testing Methods. This presentation qualifies for half of a professional development credit from SHRM and HRCI for those who attend today's presentation in its entirety. Today's presentation welcomes Senior Vice President of the Current Consulting Group, Brian Feely. Brian has more than 40 years of experience in the medical diagnostics industry. He is named as an inventor on 4 patents in the diagnostics field, is an author of numerous publications, and speaks frequently at industry meetings and workshops. He is considered an expert in the science, sales, and marketing of drug and alcohol testing products, with a particular focus on the merits of oral fluid drug testing. Brian is also well-versed in compliance services, such as drug testing policy, training for supervisors and employees, and state and federal law issues. And now it's my pleasure to turn it over to our presenter, Brian Feely from the Current Consulting Group.
Thanks so much, Greta. I really appreciate that intro, and thanks everyone for attending today. These 30-minute webinars are pretty cool. I think that they allow for everybody to get a taste of the topic and to get the overview, but not necessarily have a full 60 minutes with Q&A and all that. So I look forward to these 30-minute webinars. This one is near and dear to me because it touches on drug testing methods. As Greta said in the intro, I've been involved in drug testing and alcohol testing products for many years and have developed them, have sold them, have marketed them, and done a great deal of other types of activities related to drug testing methods. So we'll talk about that a little bit at the beginning, just to touch on a few of the key methods. The windows of detection is always an interesting part of these discussions because they're so germane to program's overall recipe, if you will. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that recipe idea in a minute. So we'll touch on windows of detection and look at the 3 different windows as they relate to sort of modern day thinking about drug testing. We'll compare the 3 different methods in a little bit more nitty-gritty way, sort of in the middle of the presentation. I'll do a kind of a quick overview of lab-based versus rapid testing. Somewhat of a focus there on oral fluid, but it really applies to both, to all different methods that are lab-based versus rapid. Talk about some of the applications for the top methods as it relates to things like pre-employment, post-accident, reasonable suspicion, et cetera, and just try to tee up that discussion a little bit so folks get an idea of how should you think about these different methods when it comes to practical aspects of applying it in the real world. Touch real quick on state laws, and if there's time, we'll get to some Q&A when we get to the end. So first, just a quick intro on drug testing and why method matters. So choosing the right testing methodology is like making sure you added all the right ingredients to your recipe for a successful program. You might liken it to the recipe for your, since it's the holiday season, I'll use cookies and cakes and pies and things that we're making for the holidays. If you miss sugar or you miss flour or you miss chocolate in a chocolate cookie, that's going to have a pretty significant impact on the final product. So does your testing technologies today, and not necessarily, if you're not considering them all and how they could potentially play into your program, you could be missing a key ingredient that could help really in the success of your overall program. So just to touch on the 3 methods that are most commonly used today for workplace screening. You've got urine, of course, which has been around for 30+ years, since the late 80s, when drug testing was first introduced into the workplace market and into employment screening, hair testing, which is newer, and then oral fluid. And that's just highlighted because I think that we're going to touch on that a little more today than maybe the other methods. And it has such a great deal of benefits to the workplace market and to drug testing in general that you have to focus on it, and you have to look at it from all the perspectives, which we will: window of detection, use, applications, laws that are coming into effect where oral fluid is becoming more of the right choice. Then I'll talk a little bit about the instant versus rapid testing, called POCT, point of collection, I call it. Some people call it point of care testing, but the point of care terminology is more associated with clinical and hospital type tests. So point of collection testing, or instant, if you will, and then laboratory-based testing. So let's move quickly to the window of detection discussion. And so window of detection really means that time frame from when someone ingests a drug, smokes it, snorts it, whatever they're doing, and that of which where you can get a positive result up until including. So said differently, if I did something right now, how long will I be able to detect that drug in my system, whether it's oral fluid or urine or hair, and they differ. That's why window of detection is so important, because by taking advantages of those different windows of detection, you can cater your program and develop it around what you want to achieve and what's the best sort of way to do your testing for your program based on what your needs are. So the amount of time that it takes for a drug to be detected, or a metabolite, that's the breakdown product of a drug, is really based on a number of factors, and it's hard to nail this down. It's really not an exact science, but there are lots of different things that are part of our makeup, part of what we're exposed to in our everyday lives, that will determine that window of detection. It can be related to your body weight and mass. How much are you drinking or hydrating, which can go both ways. It's either, it can be a positive thing and you want to stay hydrated, but people can overhydrate, and with urine screening, that's a bad thing, because you can actually dilute out your sample and end up with an invalid. Your metabolism, how quickly are you breaking down a drug? The class itself, which drug is it, and what is the half-life of that in that particular sample type? The degree of exercise, your fluid intake, all those things are being used that go into determining window of detection, and importantly, the cutoff that's really being used with a particular test, because while they're standardized for SAMHSA and DOT testing at certain levels where you have to use certain cutoffs, in non-DOT and the non-regulated markets, there are different tests out there, and different cutoffs can be used in urine screening, in oral fluid screening, in hair screening. And so the cutoff also determines how long am I going to see this positive result in this individual who used last night or this morning on their way to work. Newer tools are also giving some great opportunities here in the industry for ways to cover the different needs in the market, to deal with state laws that are changing, different hiring requirements. And so much of this kind of ties into marijuana testing, and so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But first, let's just sort of touch base on the three areas that I spoke about, three windows, if you will. And we've used slides for window of detection over the years with, bar graphs and rolling hyperbole curves and stuff. And sometimes those can get a little confusing. So this is just a way I broke it down to try to simplify it a little bit so people get, the big picture. And the big picture is you've got a short window, you've got an intermediate window, and you've got a long window, right? In that short window, we're really talking about immediate use, hours after someone has used, to maybe up to about a day. The types of tests that pick that up would be something like the new gaze eye test, if you're familiar with that. It's kind of like a DRE examination, if you will, put into a headset or into a goggles that allows you to get an idea of whether somebody's even potentially impaired. An oral fluid test is a very short window of detection, telling you what someone is doing right now, what's in their system, because it largely detects parent drug. Breath THC, brand new, just sort of hitting the market. But it is a test that shows, just for THC, the last 2 to 3 hours after someone uses that. Beyond 3 or 4 hours, you're not going to see THC in breath. So it's got a limited use, but it's got some potential interest of the industry for certain applications. So you're getting that very recent use, potential impairment. Most of these are measuring the parent drug. What does that mean? The parent is what I just did, what I took in. If I smoked marijuana, I'm getting that delta 9 THC parent drug in my oral fluid and in the blood. What ends up in the urine is not parent, which we'll talk about in a second. So more associated with workday use. So think short window, workday use, short window. Intermediate is more traditional with what you're going to see with urine screening. Oral fluid to some extent, if you're talking about some of the other drugs, not THC, you can pick that up for a couple days in oral fluid. But really, we're talking about days to maybe 1 to 2 weeks, and that's really the traditional sweet spot for urine screening. So you're picking up that recent to pass use, not parent drug unless it's the oral fluid test. Metabolite mostly is what you're detecting when you're doing urine screening. So you may get a little bit of workday use there with the oral fluid drugs, but more so you're looking at pass use. Unless of course you've got a chronic user and you're going to pick them up anytime, whether it's this morning, next week, or the week after that, a chronic user's pretty much always going to be positive. Then you have the longer window, which is really weeks to months. And that's really where your urine for marijuana comes into play, and then hair testing, of course, because that's now looking at as far as 3 or 4 months out. So it's definitely past use, lifestyle type testing, more historical long-term use. So to compare these in a little bit more detail, and not to get too far into the nitty-gritty weeds here, but basically, when you look at urine versus oral fluid and hair, there are some similarities, and then there's some definite differences. Some of the similarities would be you have lab-based and you actually have rapid testing for all three of these. I wouldn't have said that 2 years ago for hair, but there is a rapid testing hair option now. Scientifically, again, very similar. The windows of detection is where they really differ. Urine is going to give you that intermediate one, and oral fluid more immediate use, and then hair long term, as I said before. The value in detecting recent use, if that's really what you're after, urine is really going to be more of medium value. Oral fluid will be your highest value, and then the lowest one would be hair if you're looking for that recent use. And I'm just comparing of these three methods. Detecting marijuana or parent THC, urine doesn't do that. Oral fluid does, and hair does not. Legal by state, pretty much urine and oral fluid are similar. Urine's been approved in all 50 states for a long time. It's approved in 48 states for oral fluid, and there are some provisions for point of collection tests that you have to go by. They're not allowed in all states, or if they are, there's certain limitations you have to follow. And then lab-based testing in most states for hair testing, although hair testing is not federally approved yet. It's proposed. We'll see how that goes over the coming years, but both urine and oral fluid are SAMHSA. There are SAMHSA regulations for that, although oral fluid is not implemented yet for regulated testing. It's coming, and so there are federal guidelines and DOT guidelines for both of those. All right, so some of the differences between lab-based and point of collection or instant tests, if you will. And most of these bullet points don't differentiate between oral fluid and urine or some other rapid test. There are some nuances here that include the oral fluid, but for the most part, a lab-based test is you're going to get your results within 24 to 72 hours because the sample has to be collected, it has to go to the lab, they have to do the screening, and then if the sample screens positive, it has to then go on for confirmation testing. And so there's a longer time frame there for lab-based, whereas with an instant test, a rapid, whether it's oral fluid or another, it's a near immediate result. Most of these takes 5 or 10 minutes to run the test. In the lab-based test, it's read by the lab. The point of collection test is humanly read, or it can also be read by a reader. So a lot of the companies, or several of the companies, have readers now that can read the result of an instant point of collection test. It's an initial screen and confirmation test combined when you do a lab-based test. With oral fluid, you're doing the initial screen, and then it gets sent to the lab, either the original sample or a new oral fluid collection is sent to the lab for that confirmation testing. There's a long history to draw from with lab-based tests. The collections are simple, and they're usually done at a clinic, so that even simplifies it even more if you're looking to keep hands off and not be involved in it. But using collection sites has its own drawbacks, quite a few of them actually. With THC detection, you have a longer collection, longer THC detection for a lab-based test, particular lab-based oral fluid, whereas with the point of collection test, the rapid test THC detection windows can be a little shorter than lab-based. You're really looking at some considerable differences there in terms of the cutoff level that I spoke about before. And a key thing that people do really like about rapid tests and oral fluid is really, prominent here, because you don't need a bathroom. You're doing a collection 100% directly observed, so I can get that result quick. And if you're hiring, that speed to hire is really reduced when you're doing an instant oral fluid test. Final note that I'll add here is that state laws may affect your sample type that you can use, and so we're experts in the state laws and what you can do and can't do, or what you have to watch out for regarding different sample types and the use of rapid tests. Certain states allow for it, others allow for it, but it has to be FDA cleared, or it has to be done in a state certified lab, et cetera, et cetera. So you just have to make sure that you know about these state laws, and if not, you don't know it or don't want to even be bothered with it, give us a call and we can help you with that sort of thing. Okay, just go back 1 second to that header, because I want to. Okay, so I want to just point this out. In the past, for so many years, urine was really the only choice, because number one, it was just the most popular method, the most entrenched, the only thing that was approved, the only thing you could use for regulated testing. That's all changing. So now there are many other options, and one size doesn't necessarily need to fit all anymore. And this is really important. If you're the traditional sort of workplace account that's been doing drug testing for years, and you've stuck to urine testing just because you haven't really dove into some of the other methods that are out there, it's past time to do that. There's just too many reasons for you to be looking at other methodologies that can add to your program. And it doesn't have to replace urine completely. It can be picking a method that's better for a certain type of application. And so let's talk about those applications for a little bit. This first, the method is on the left, and I included breath even though it's limited to THC and it's still early stage. The eye scan is again a non sample type test, but it's geared toward impairment, and this is becoming very important in the workplace these days, because more of the states are starting to include language about having to show some sort of sign of impairment before you take action on an employee. And so we're seeing that in different state law language. So the use of these tests, like the gaze eye scan and some other methods that are coming out that look at fitness for duty testing, and we've been studying these very closely, keeping track of them and working with some of these companies to better understand their methods, are really coming into their own. Impairment testing is going to continue to play a role, or is going to continue to be of interest, and is eventually going to be playing even more of a role than it does today, in particular in combination with things like an oral fluid test or a urine test or a hair screen. So first column, pre-employment and site entry. So I included site entry for a reason, because the pre-employment and site entry is kind of they're very similar, right? We're allowing someone to come to work for us. We're allowing them to get entry to a site that they weren't in before and that they weren't tested before to go into. And so really, when you look at, from my perspective, when you look at the different methods, they all have a role in pre-employment or site entry testing. It really depends on what you're looking to achieve. And so, I list them all there as good applications for that type of testing. Obviously, the breath THC test is only going to be applicable to marijuana. So, if you're doing that as a pre-site entry, you're missing the other drugs. It may be something that you want to do and employ at a site where they're coming back from lunch, or they've already been in, but now they've been out, and it almost seems like I've got someone that might have been in the parking lot doing something they shouldn't be doing. You can pop a test on them. That can be oral fluid, it could be the gaze eye scan, or it could be a breath THC test. So they have their applications, and you just have to think through what's best for you in yours. Random testing, I have all those boxes checked, because really it depends on your program. What are you looking to achieve in that random program? Am I looking for a fitness slash suspicion type test, or a random test just to keep people honest? You could really use all these methods for that. Now, when it comes to post-accident, I'm really now interested in was there the potential impact from something somebody just did? And so if you're looking at post-accident, urine and hair aren't going to tell you what they just did. They're going to tell you what their past use was, and it's not necessarily going to tie to the behavioral aspect of what you observed in that post-incident or accident. Same thing for cause. You're really looking to utilize those shorter window, more immediate use tests than you would a urine or a hair test. And then follow-up or return to duty, you're really looking at someone who's coming back after being out of work. Perhaps they were in an EAP program or some other issue, and you're going to want to look beyond just what they did this morning. And if they can't pass an oral fluid test on a return to duty, that's a real problem. So you could throw that in there too. But usually you're looking at urine or hair to really know, have they cleaned themselves up? Is there potentially an issue that you still need to be aware of? So hopefully those are helpful, and just thinking about it again. At Kern Consulting, we focus on drug testing methods and state laws and all these things, and we can be helpful in sizing up the type of test and methodology that you might want to consider for your program, whether it's safety sensitive, whether you don't have safety sensitive people in some cases, and maybe you want to employ a different method for them. Again, it can all be done, just has to be spelled out in your policy. Do what you say and say what you do. Okay, so state laws apply. You really do have to be aware. Years ago, I would say that people could use a pretty simple policy, and there were even template policies. People would plug in their data and their where they operate, and it would suffice. But really, that's not the case anymore. There are so many different things to consider in the different states. You have mandatory and voluntary laws, right? A mandatory is one that you must follow in a state. A voluntary one is, for example, in the state of Florida, they have a voluntary law that allows you to get a discount on your workers' comp if you follow the drug-free workplace program in the state of Florida. Other states have these voluntary programs as well. You don't have to follow that voluntary program, but if you do, you gain the benefits of whatever that voluntary law includes. So those are must understands, the mandatory voluntary laws. Case law is really important too, because there are lots of things that come up in states that where they might not even have a mandatory law, but their case law has set the stage for how you need to be thinking about your drug-free workplace program and what things you should be doing and not doing, because they really set the stage for a lawsuit if it were to come up. Those are the things that your people are going to sometimes defer to when it comes to a court of law. And so the workers' comp and unemployment compensation laws, they're all over the place. Whether you want to do a denial on a workers' comp or unemployment compensation case, there's different laws and different things you need to be aware of to do workers' comp denial. You can see some of the numbers here in terms of how they vary by state. Industry specific, there's even these that impact certain industries like construction or building or retail or whatever the case may be, public works. Those are different aspects of state laws that you also need to be aware of, because you may only need to follow an industry specific law if you're in a certain industry. And especially if there's no mandatory law, you need to be aware of the industry specific law and maybe the case law And then finally, something that's sort of complicated our lives tremendously over the years, and so right now for medical and recreational marijuana, we have 41 states and a territory in DC that have medical marijuana laws, 46 states that have recreational marijuana laws. All these things are playing into, your program, your policy, what you should be thinking about doing, how you need to be careful about discrimination, both in hiring and in existing employee screening programs. And so all these things are really important and need to become part of that policy, which is why one size no longer fits all anymore. Just like urine testing doesn't fit all, one policy, one state coverage, or trying to fit everything into one particular addendum, if you will, in your policy doesn't work anymore. It's really important to be educated on all these laws, different methodologies, how you're going to use them. And then the way we do policies is we typically will review an existing one. And by the way, if you have if you're having a policy that's not reviewed annually, you could become non-compliant fairly easily these days. So we recommend an annual review of a policy. We get them sometimes that are 3-4 years old that no one has looked at them. And they need to be essentially rewritten, maybe updated, but for the most part, we do a lot of rewrites because it's just so much easier than trying to modify the things that are in an older policy. And policies, the way we write them, also have amendments for each state that you do business in, because they're all very different in terms of, or often they're different in terms of the state laws, methodologies, workers' comp, and all those things, so that if you have an addendum for the states you do business in, you clearly are documenting what you're doing in each one of those states, what your program consists of. When somebody has a question, you pull out your policies and you do business in Alabama, the addendum's in there, tells you exactly what your recipe is for that state and handling that employee. So just looking at timing here, I think that gets us pretty far into our 30-minute webinar. My contact information is here. The upcoming sessions, Bill has one coming up in February and another one toward the end of February with Jackie Perrone. And I think we have time for a question or two. And let me just see what came in. So one question, so can you comment on parent THC as it relates to California and Washington law? So yes, good question. In the states of California and Washington, in 2024, they both instituted laws that require someone who's doing drug testing for marijuana to not use a test that picks up past use, or let's say the metabolite. So essentially you have to be testing for current use because of marijuana being legal in those states. They don't want you looking back on a urine test to what somebody could have done a week ago or 2 weeks ago. Oral fluid is a great solution in that scenario because it picks up parent THC. It would be compliant with both the new California and Washington laws. There's a little bit of a nuance there with California versus Washington. One of them applies to employees and applicants. I believe that's California. And in Washington, it's really for your pre-employment or applicant testing scenarios. There are some carve-outs for certain industries in those two states. But by and large, if you're doing urine testing in California and Washington for your non-DOT program, that needs to change. And are there new impairment tests? Are they FDA cleared? Oh, are the new impairment tests FDA cleared, and do they need to be? Well, interesting, because the impairment tests that are coming out are not necessarily, their intended use is not to do drug screening and to go to court per se with that type of a result. They're really initial tests, and they're really there to help you assess whether someone, and it goes beyond just the use of drugs. It could be someone had a bad night. They didn't get a good night's sleep because the baby was up, or the baby was sick, or they were sick, or whatever. They could be not fit for duty for a number of reasons. So these tests are just giving you initial preliminary screen to say there could be impairment here, or there could be something that's off, and then you can basically take that employee aside and have a discussion, and then determine, should we go through our regular screening program, which would include your normal drug testing process and confirmation processes. So essentially, no, they're not FDA cleared today, and probably don't need to be. In the long run, that may change, but right now the answer is no. And then lastly, when will regulated testing be allowed with oral fluid? So we're waiting for 2 labs to be certified by HHS in order for regulated oral fluid testing to begin. And the guidelines are there, they're in place. The developers of the tests have been working on those and getting them validated in the laboratories, and then the laboratories have to submit to the regulatory or to the HHS certifying group to come in and have them get inspected and certified. I don't have the answer to when that's going to happen. We've all been trying to figure that out over the last year plus. But you know, I'm hopeful that we'll see something in early 2026 where some labs will start to get certified, and we'll kind of revisit this as we do more webinars and updates as we go along. So Greta, just bringing you back in, how are we doing on time? That about does it according to my clock.
Yeah, we're good, Brian, and thank you so much.
Sure.
And thank you to everyone today for joining us for today's edition of Current and 30. We hope these insights help you stay informed and confident in your workplace drug screening decisions. As a reminder, this presentation was recorded, and you will receive instructions in a few days informing you on how to access the recording via email. Additionally, this presentation did qualify for half of a professional credit from SHRM and HRCI. For those who attended today's presentation in its entirety, if you have met that requirement, you will be emailed the activity IDs in the next few days. Remember, we'll be back every second and fourth Monday of 2026 with 3 new things you need to know. Be sure to follow the Current Consulting Group and check your inbox for upcoming session details. Until next time, stay current and have a great day.